Hello, and welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast, a podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host, Praneeth Grewal, Assistant Professor of Vascular Neurology at Medical University of South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and today I'm going to be talking about physician wellness and burnout with Dr. Dyke Drummond, who is a family practice physician and CEO and founder of thehappymd.com, which is a coaching, training, and consulting organization focused on the treatment and prevention of physician burnout, working with individual doctors and healthcare organizations nationwide. I also have Dr. Divya Singhal with me, who is a neurophysiologist, educator, and VA neurologist at University of Texas Health Science Center, San Antonio, and recent chair of Women in Neurology section of the American Academy of Neurology. Dr. Singhal helped develop and served as a faculty for AAN's Live Well, Lead Well program to positively impact wellness. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Dr. Drummond and Dr. Singhal.
Yeah, you bet.
Good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
You know, this is a topic which is very close to my heart. For some physicians, the training years as well as years as an attending physician can be very stressful. As chair of the wellness committee at my department and as physician wellness advocate, I have been trying to bring to light some of these areas and talk more about burnout being a real problem in our careers. I am eager to learn more from your experience. What really pivoted me to reach out to you both and schedule this podcast was the recent Medscape article. It was an article about lifestyle and burnout report which detailed rates of physician happiness and happiness with their personal and professional work. According to the report, 42% of physicians reported that they were burned out last year, but it has risen to about 47% this year, and neurologists are no exception, with female neurologists reporting higher rates of burnout than their male colleagues. After reading this, I wanted to talk to and discuss more with other professionals who are actively working to bring about wellness and reduce burnout. So let's start off with you, Dr. Drummond. Tell us a bit about you and what motivated you to get involved in the field of physician wellness and burnout prevention coaching and to start The Happy MD.
Well, I'm a family practice doctor by training, and for 10 years I had a full-service family practice inside a 40-doctor multi-specialty group, little town called Mount Vernon, Washington, which is about halfway between Seattle and Vancouver, BC. And I really loved being a doctor. As a family doc, I felt like my exam room was sort of like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates. You never knew what was behind the next door, and that being a doctor was half detective, figuring it out, and half teacher, teaching the patient how to play their role in the healing process. And my burnout came relatively suddenly at the age of 40. And now that was back in the year 2000. So it's been 22 years now. But my career came to a crashing halt. And it actually was a physical sensation that drove me out. It was a choking sensation I would get in the office when I was seeing patients. I took a sabbatical, hoping it would go away, and it didn't. And so I actually walked away from my medical career at that point and became certified as an executive coach. It was the first thing I did was I got a coaching certification. And coaching is very different than being a doctor. Doctors diagnose and treat. Coaches asking questions to help the client get to the future that they're imagining is ideal for them. And I started thehappymd.com, and it's thehappymd. You have to put a "the" on the front, otherwise you go to a medical marijuana site. I started that site in the year 2010. I was the first physician coach out on the internet. And fortunately or otherwise, our business has mirrored the growth in the interest of and the prevalence of burnout in the American physician population in the last 12 years or so. So I now have about 4,000 hours of one-on-one physician coaching experience. We have 5 coaches that work with us at thehappymd.com. And since I'm also a writer, when I would see patterns of what was burning people out or getting them better, I would write blog posts that turned into a book. Then people asked me to start training their employee physicians. And at this point in time, we've trained about 40,000 doctors for 175 organizations across 4 continents. And what I can say is that The numbers that you quote in that MedSafe survey are actually low, given the average burnout prevalence studies that I've seen since COVID has come to town. Those are numbers that I would consider to be average prior to COVID, but now it's not uncommon to see 50, 60%. I just want to just say really quick what that means. That means that half of your doctors across all specialties and all organizations across the entire world, half of your doctors on any given office day are coming to work with at least one symptom of burnout. And we can prove that because of that burnout, they are going to offer lower quality, lower safety, lower patient satisfaction encounters, and they're going to be less engaged and happy about their choice to become a doctor in the first place. It's an epidemic. It is everywhere all the time. It kills patients and it kills doctors. And one of the things we have to do is what you're doing, and that is to have the conversation about this elephant in the room. And I'll just stop there for right now. There's so much to talk about.
Thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Drummond. I do agree that most physicians do experience one or more symptoms of burnout at some point in their career, some more than others. Dr. Singhal, as an expert in this area and with your work through American Academy of Neurology, can you explain what is burnout? We use the term a lot. What exactly is burnout and why is it so prevalent in the field of healthcare?
Certainly, Dr. Graywall. So the technical definition of burnout is a physical or mental collapse, which is caused by overwork or stress. And if we talk about the Maslow burnout inventory definition of burnout as it relates to this topic, it's a constellation of 1, 2, or 3 of the following symptoms. Either there is an emotional exhaustion, such as a loss of interest or enthusiasm for clinical practice. The second would be depersonalization, which could be manifested as a cynicism, treating patients as objects instead of specific individuals, or a sense of detachment from work that used to be meaningful otherwise. Or the third, of career dissatisfaction, which manifests itself as a reduced sense of personal accomplishment and or ineffectiveness. To Dr. Drummond's earlier point of how this is the elephant in the room of burnout, some of the questions that we've all been asking as physicians is this truly burnout or is this moral injury? And I'm sure we'll be going a little bit more into it. Dr. Drummond brought in a really great point of how executive coaching is incredibly invaluable in his journey to it. I would add that my lens of looking more into this came from being early career faculty and realizing that all of our starry-eyed medical students and residents came in with this excitement, emotional enthusiasm, sense of individualizing for patients and sacrificing so much in their personal and social lives to become physicians. And by the end of their residency or fellowship, you didn't really see that gleam in their eyes anymore, which is what led me to look into more into burnout, the data that Dr. Drummond and you've also referenced.
Completely agree with you, Dr. Singhal. We do see that a lot, especially early on in residency. You see residents being so enthusiastic and eager, but somewhere along the line, possibly by virtue of doing more and more call, they do experience emotional detachment and cynicism, which impacts their training and can be harmful. This is definitely a concern. Dr. Drummond, I have seen your webpage and have listened to you talk a bit about 3-layered physician support ecosystem. Can you briefly describe this to the audience? And what would you suggest that our trainees and early career physicians like myself do to build resiliency and combat burnout?
Well, the 3-layer ecosystem that you're talking about is actually our attempt to address the deficits that lead to the tendency to burn out in the first place. So what I've found is that burnout in medical education, either a medical school residency, fellowship, anytime you're still a student and have not graduated to be an independent practitioner, is very different than burnout in practice. And it's also interesting to me, I'm 63 years old, so I trained at a time when there were no work hour restrictions. And I know they beat the snot out of us, and they beat out the ability to recognize your own physical needs. And it really was a survival contest at that point in time. But even with work hour restrictions, the dynamic is still the same. You show up to do your job no matter what. You never fail to show up. You would never ask for any break or time off or support because we follow two prime directives, especially in the medical education process. The first one is conscious. Everybody says it. The patient comes first. And if the patient comes first, that means that you come, and I won't fill in the blank, but your mind will typically throw in the word last. And then the second prime directive is never show weakness, never do anything that would make anybody think you haven't got what it takes. So the assignment in medical education is survival to the finish line. So what happens with residents and fellows and medical students is we typically jettison our outside life because the acquisition of the skills and experience and knowledge to become a physician is so all-consuming that there isn't much room for an outside life. And the key is to make it to the finish line. It doesn't matter whether you're all in one piece when you get there. You could be missing a leg and one eye. It doesn't matter. If you can struggle through the graduation ceremony, you're out. And then the assignment becomes out in practice. How do you take this choice to become a doctor and the price you just paid and the conditioning you carry with you and turn that into a life where being a doctor is a career choice, but that choice doesn't then eat your life. So the assignments are a little bit different. Things that we're missing, and this is the three layers. One, nobody knows anything about stress management, and burnout prevention when they graduate from their training program. I don't care what patchwork little wellness programs people are putting together. They don't understand the basic dynamic that medical education sets you up for burnout down the road. It doesn't protect you from it. Number two, community. Normally, medical education is a pretty Lone Ranger solo experience. We don't tend to help each other. We're very competitive. So to have a community of like-minded people around you, oftentimes it's established as a practicing physician in your society because a society typically has your interests at heart in a way your employer doesn't. And lastly, if you have education to be able to recognize and prevent burnout, and you have some tools, and you have a community of support where you can be honest and open and truthful and transparent and get support, you'll also need some coaching. That's the third layer. So training, community, and coaching to be able to adapt these tools to your specific life circumstances. So for instance, everything's different for a female physician because of our society's tendency to put more child rearing and family kind of context activities on the back of the woman in a traditional heterosexual couple. So I see the people that are most at risk for burnout are the folks that have the most intense careers. So academics with small children who are women like that. So that's just a little bit of the dynamics that we've discovered.
Interesting. And what are some of the warning signs of burnout that we can look for as professionals in ourselves and in our colleagues, Dr. Drummond and Dr. Singal?
Dr. Singal, go for it.
Certainly. So some of the signs that we could be seeing at work could be anything from a need to reduce work hours suddenly, even though someone's been fully engaged at work, or there could be a little bit of a sense of less engagement or enjoyment at work, needing to take personal time off. There could be impacts on family life and strain there. Medical errors would be a big one that perhaps colleagues would become more aware of early on, especially if it's something which is out of the norm for that individual, or a reduction in quality of care, which could look like spending less time with the family, being less resilient in their difficult, crucial conversations with family, etc., or just truly questioning whether this is the right fit for them. So for instance, if there is a trainee who's having these conversations about what are other careers I could pursue midway, it would make one stop and wonder if that might be an early sign of burnout. I'm talking about more of these intangible things because the more obvious things would perhaps be not as sudden or soft signs like substance use or fragmented relationships would come later on. And our hope is to catch them early and use the training and community and coaching to help support and mitigate, as Dr. Drummond was referring to.
Yeah, and I would say that I make things really personal. If a person is having this thought process and the little voice in the back of their head, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going like this. If they're having this thought press, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get hit by a car on the way to work today and I won't have to see patients. Or the third one is, I don't know why I became a doctor in the first place. So that inner voice coming out of one of your colleagues' mouth or in your head is a reason to sit up and take notice. But just notice that you are also programmed to ignore that voice and carry on, especially if you're in training, because the only goal of a trainee is to get to the finish line. We discount how overwhelming that is, because everybody has one person they remember who quit in medical school. But the interesting thing is no doctor I've ever met can remember the name of that person, because they get ghosted so fast if they don't show up and pull their weight.
Looking back, Dr. Drummond, how would you have built your ideal practice to actually prevent burnout in the first place? Because the goal is to actually prevent it from happening rather than, going through it and then trying to remediate. But how would you have built your practice?
Well, you have to go back to the origin story of all physicians, right? So the origin story is we all stood at a fork in the road at one point in time where we had a decision to make. Are you going to go to medical school or literally do anything else? And all of us chose, for various reasons, at various times in our lives, to become a physician. And what that meant was we chose to be a light worker, to ally our professional life in service to the forces of light in the universe as they battle specific forces of darkness, illness, suffering, death, dying, and family members' crazed attempts to deal with those things. And in that choice to put the patient first, we put ourselves at risk for burnout. And we dropped ourselves into the medical education complex for 7 to 16 years, where we were going to be, pushed well below any tolerance, any energy threshold that we have, pushed so hard that we would come out the other side molded into different individuals than the ones who went in. And what we're molded to do as residents, again, this is 7 to 16 years. Basic training in the military is only 6 to 13 weeks, and we know that conditions the participants. But by the time you emerge from the medical education process, you are used to doing what other people expect of you, coloring inside the lines, not challenging anybody. And typically the doctor grabs their first job and their job description is one that's taken off the rack by their employer, and their job description is only designed to meet the business objectives of their employer. So even the concept of you sitting down and thinking about, in an ideal world, what would your job look like, is foreign to most physicians. Normally, I'm the only person who's ever asked them, hey, in an ideal world, if you had a magic wand, if you were this king of the forest, if you could design your career to perfectly match what you were looking for back in the day and what fits you now, what would that look like? What kind of patients would you be seeing, doing what kind of things, on what kind of team, in what kind of organization, for what kind of hours and pay, and where in the world? Nobody's ever asked a doctor that. So just the concept of having a place, having a job description that you would run towards that is ideal for you is foreign to a well-trained physician. But it is the key to avoiding burnout, because if you aren't proactive and building something that that is designed for you and that you would enjoy, what ends up happening is you get there by bouncing off episodes of burnout over the course of your career. And for most physicians, burnout is inevitable at some point in their career. And they look back at burnout and they say, I'm so glad that happened, because otherwise I'd still be in that crap job I had when the burnout hit.
I do agree with that, Dr. Drummond. I think what is our ideal practice and what we want to do in our ideal practice is a question that I do think everybody, every physician should ask when they are searching for a job, but not many do. It's, as you mentioned, the job is designed according to a business model. You have to meet certain goals, you have to meet certain RVUs, you have to see certain patients, and whether, is this what you wanted? Is this your ideal job? Not many people ask that, especially fresh out of training, when you don't really know what exactly you're looking for and how the system works. So what do you think, Dr. Singhal, are some of the things that we need to change in our training and medical culture that can promote well-being, and where should that change start from? Because I do think it is time that we talk about these things, and it is time that we start working on these changing, because we are already, we have physician workforce shortage in the United States.
Absolutely. We definitely have a physician workforce shortage. And as alluded to earlier, it's only gotten worse since the pandemic and beyond. In terms of where do we start working on it, it's best for a multi-pronged approach. Some of the things are individual, as Dr. Drummond alluded to, kind of catering and envisioning what's the right fit for someone. But as we all know, there are a lot of pressures, metrics, expectations that are set by the system, which could be divided into an institutional level intervention or approach, and also systemic, more from a healthcare perspective. Some of these are easier to tackle than others. In terms of the individual approach, as well as the systemic approach, I would say what you're doing right now and having this podcast is incredible, having these resources available, having open conversations, realizing that burnout and burnout mitigation is not just a unique task on us as physicians and healthcare professionals, but a shared responsibility and a challenge. We may not have all the answers, but at least that acceptance, awareness, seeking out mentoring, coaching, or whatever else may be of value to us. Recognizing that the personal well-being doesn't necessarily mitigate the institutional or systemic barriers, but at least it helps us feel a bit more centered or grounded in that day while we make long-term life decisions on what does our ideal practice look like. From an organizational perspective, speaking to individual healthcare institutions or practices, it looks like dedicating time as well as financial resources and staff support to physician well-being avenues, kind of putting your money into those. For instance, the amount of time and energy we spend on EMR upgrades and ensuring metrics are monitored and followed, using the same momentum for well-being initiatives, for coaching, for protected time and flexibility for physicians to be able to attend to personal matters, for dedicated protective time to be able to take care of administrative tasks, which are not necessarily built into the FTE, so that it's truly time that a physician is able to use. I don't know of any physician who'd use their administrative time for anything but to use it more creatively, whether it's to make that extra phone call to a patient or family member who needs support, or come up with something even better for their colleagues or future physicians. And then from a systemic level, it's a conversation which is there for different nations. Speaking to US specifically, I know there are some ongoing initiatives to make this a big emphasis and focus of how do we protect our physicians' time more? How do we create more flexibility? And honestly, I think we have more questions than answers at the moment. However, some of the regulatory changes that are being advocated for at a state and national level may lead to some positive effects over time.
Well, if I can just chime in here with some high level basics. Anytime you have physicians working inside a healthcare delivery organization, you have a perfect replication of the canary in the coal mine. Back in the day, before there were air quality indicators, you'd carry a canary into the mine because the canary dies before a human. So canary is an indicator of the conditions in the mine. And the simplest way to prevent burnout is for the canary, you, to have your own personal wellness strategy. There's no solution to burnout because it's not a problem. So you're looking for a strategy, a handful of things that you do for yourself to protect your own energy and your own spirit. And for someone to be installing a corporate coal mine strategy, a handful of things that the institution does to recognize and prevent burnout amongst their people, and realize there is a constant tension built into the system where the organization is at odds. Organizational goals and incentives are at odds with wellness incentives of the workers in that system. So what you're looking for too is a job in an organization that cares about you and your energy levels and your health and well-being, happiness and engagement. And that is rare, which is why you have to use your ideal job description and get really good at interviewing to find a job that will be a healthy place for you to stay long term.
That definitely is something that every trainee should be taught and should look for in their practice when they are interviewing. Usually, and I agree with Dr. Singhal too, that there are some initiatives that are being done, and there are different organizations that are working on, trying to combat burnout, trying to ensure physician wellness, trying to maintain the workforce. But I agree, there's more questions than answers at this point. There's no for somebody, for the lack of better word, for somebody like me who's a stroke neurologist, we do everything evidence-based. There's guidelines for everything, but we do not have any specific set guidelines for burnout that can just be adapted by different organizations throughout the US. So I think that's one area that needs to be worked on. What do you think about that, Dr. Singhal?
I agree with you completely, Dr. Graywall, that there is definitely a need for coming up with some evidence-based guidelines if possible. And that actually reminds me of a 2017 American Conference on Physician Health, which had occurred, which included Stanford, American Medical Association, and Mayo Clinic to try and come up with guidelines. And there are some incredible things that the National Academy of Medicine, AMA, and AN have done as well. I think part of the challenge has only been compounded by the recent pandemic. So although it's hard to come up with a quick evidence-based quick fix, you're right that there are some references. As Dr. Drummond was saying, being able for every individual to customize what sort of job they want and being able to prepare for that helps. Once in a job that you desire or like, engaging and seeing what are resources that the institution has available to support you or your practice, whether it's a leadership program, it's coaching, it's a collaborative project, whatever gives that person meaning. This reminds me of a wonderful saying by Viktor Frankl, one of the famous Austrian neurologists and psychiatrists, that life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. And each of us enter the field of healthcare and became a physician and sacrificed so much for having that meaning and purpose. So until we can get to that elusive autonomy and perfect goal, every little bit that we can do day by day certainly helps. And I'd also add that we, at some point as a society, have to embrace the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty. A lot of good changes are being made at an individual and systemic level, but the changes that are happening, pandemic or otherwise, are just too fast for healthcare evidence-based strategies to be able to catch up with. So if we can continue to have collectively shared resources and ideas, that also will work. We may not ever get to the perfect evidence-based recipe for burnout mitigation or wellness.
Yeah, you're looking for a solution if people think that that's true. Now, CEOs always want solutions, but you can't use the word solution with burnout. So there will never be, if you do steps A, B, D, and E, you can avoid burnout. One of the things that ought to be taught in residency is the act of regular self-reflection. Working as a doctor is like stepping into your own private whirlwind at work. And inside the whirlwind, all you can see is the inside walls of the whirlwind. You have to step out and assume a different perspective in order to see what's really going on and to adjust your job description and who you're being at work to match what you really desire. But the act of self-reflection is beat out of us in residency and fellowship. So it's the thing that I believe is the most important thing that we teach in our coaching practice is just the act of self-reflection it takes to have a coaching call. Is some of the first self-reflection a lot of people have done in years. But without the ability and the habit of stepping out of the whirlwind to ask yourself, how satisfied am I? What could I change to make this a more satisfying, meaningful, purposeful practice? Without that regular habit, you can't legislate or teach people how to prevent burnout unless they're intimately involved in designing their own life.
That makes a nice segue into our next question, Dr. Drummond. So how do physician coaches help? Full disclosure, I have never worked with a physician coach or been to a wellness retreat so far, but I'm really interested to know, because I've heard stories from people about it being life-changing and very fulfilling. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it is one of those times outside the whirlwind. Where you are with someone. In our practice, all of our coaches are certified executive coaches, ICF certified executive coaches, and vastly experienced clinical physicians. So what you are doing is sitting with a colleague who is interested in you getting what you want out of your career. That's a relationship with a colleague that most doctors have never had. And what we first do is simply ask questions to help our client physician figure out what they really want, not what they want to run away from, not what they don't like about their current job, but what their ideal job would look like, the job that they would run towards. Because the truth is you can avoid everything you don't want and you still won't get what you want, because the only way to get what you want is to figure out what that is and go in that direction. And then once our client, and this can take weeks, once our client has a better idea of what they want in their practice, we coach them to take different actions. We ask questions to them about what actions they might take, new actions, because Einstein's insanity trap, it says you got to take new actions to get new results. It's a law of nature, just like gravity. So we coach them to take a new action and see what difference it makes. We tweak and adjust, and gradually over the period of 6 to 9 months, a person's job satisfaction, if we scale it from 0 to 10, might go from a 2 to a 6. And when you have a doctor say that their level of satisfaction is a 6, they're feeling pretty comfortable. And our record at this point is about 70% of doctors can recover from burnout without changing jobs. 30% have to change jobs. And interestingly enough, of that 30%, every single one has a conflict with their boss. So that is as quickly as I can explain what we do. But the fact that you're taking time out of your practice to talk about what you want and how you would get there is incredibly important. And I will say that when it comes to burnout, there's 900,000 doctors in America. 50% burnout rate means 450,000 of them are burned out today. The vast majority don't recognize that that's what's going on. But the percentage of those people who actually end up recognizing their burnout, making an appointment, and hiring a coach is vanishingly small. So it's a huge need and a very, very small what we would call it market from my perspective as a coach that makes a living coaching, but there's very small utilization of coaches in the physician universe.
And why do you think that is? I know there's stigma. There's a lot of stigma around burnout, going part-time, taking time off, stigma around mental health. Is that the reason why people are not utilizing these services? Is there something we can do to combat this stigma?
Well, I will say that your residency education is perfectly designed to eliminate your ability to recognize your own energy levels because it's irrelevant. If you don't show up, you're out. Now, once you're out in practice, you can usually get some support, but most physicians don't recognize that's what they're experiencing is burnout. So that's the number one block. The number two block is the prime directive of never show weakness. The first thing that happens when a doctor is struggling is shame and guilt, and an inner voice says, what if they find out, right? So all of those inner blocks to asking for help are installed and driven home like a nail with a 18-ounce waffle face framing hammer, driven like a nail into your subconscious that you're not supposed to ask for help, or there's obviously something wrong with you. And this is even more difficult for people who aren't like me. I'm a big old straight white guy. So if you're not a big old straight white guy like me, your programming is even stronger not to ask for help or to look like you haven't got what it takes. So all of those things are in play, multiple layers of blockade to asking for help.
That is definitely something that, I think should be a part of residency to train physicians how to look for those signs, how to combat those signs, and how to develop a personal resiliency program and what to actually look for in their jobs. I don't think when I was interviewing for jobs, I asked about wellness programs at other institutions. So that should be, I think, a question that every physician should ask. Going to you, Dr. Singhal, I know that you developed a structured residency mentoring program at University of Oklahoma when you were there, and then you did serve as on the AAN's Live Well, Lead Well program. While you were designing these programs, did you think there were some lessons that we can learn from other careers and actually bring a change in the physician wellness?
Great question, Dr. Graywall. Yes, a couple of things that I learned through the process is that there is a lot of value in synergy. Having people at the table helping design the curriculum from different stages, career stages as physicians, ranging from ortho medical student to neurology resident deep in the trenches, exhausted and called, to early and mid-career faculty, all of those values and inputs were incredible and helped design a robust curriculum. In terms of what are some of the ideas I gathered from other fields, one of the biggest things we learned is that sometimes creativity comes from not only out-of-the-box thinking, but out-of-the-box avenues. So the curriculum that we designed for AAN included having a train the trainer approach, where you incorporate some of the elements of coaching that Dr. Drummond was referring to, having each attendee have a coach for the duration of a year and being able to do dyad coaching as well as one-on-one. And then in addition to that, also having mentors. So they serve two different purposes. The coach helping one self-reflect and see what their own inner values, motivations, and goals are. And the mentor, having known them in a professional capacity and their strengths and opportunities, using that inherently to harness and help them align with their ongoing institutional challenges, trends, or what their future vision for themselves is. And another thing I felt inspired from other healthcare fields, a lot of fields outside of healthcare have different challenges and different strengths. So it's sometimes helpful for us to acknowledge and accept that healthcare is different. Although it's compared to customers and hospitality industry, to my knowledge, no one goes to the hospital because they're super excited and thrilled to be spending the next few days for an elective or a mandated or needed admission, as opposed to the hospitality industry where everyone is there to have a good time. My point being that it's accepting that there are some things that we cannot change about the system right away, but what can we do on an individual or group level to help navigate that sometimes helps us reset expectations for ourselves as well as for the patients that we serve. It actually reminds me of a recent Enneagram article from 2020 that said something beautifully about how part of the reasons for physician burnout are how there has been an impact on autonomy, competence, and relatedness. We all came into the field, once we're trained, once we've done that 12 to 16 years of training, we're going to be able to treat patients the way we want. And part of developing these well-being courses and structured residency mentoring curriculums is to see what is the flexibility that we can create for each resident or faculty physician within the systemic constraints that helps them find that joy and sense of satisfaction for themselves, as well as acknowledging that we may not be able to solve everything, but what are some other factors that affect their well-being sense as a physician, meaning what are the financial needs? What are the needs of significant others or families? What are other things that are impacting their quality of life and satisfaction at work? And what can we do to help improve that?
Dr. Drummond, do you have any key takeaways for this?
Well, that kind of a conversation with each one of your physicians where you know those outside influences, what makes them tick, what turns them on, what flips their switch would imply that you care and that you regularly round on, shadow, or meet with your physicians as a leader in the organization. And that's just not the standard of leadership in healthcare. In healthcare, if your boss, let's just conduct this experiment for everybody who's listening. Imagine you're seeing patients one day and your receptionist comes to the back, or the ward secretary or the person who is the ward chief comes to you in the hospital and says, hey, your boss is here, wants to see you between your next two patients. Are you happy about that? Or are you thinking, oh crap, what did I do now? That's the standard of leadership in healthcare. And I've asked thousands of people that question, and nearly all of them will tell me they know they're in trouble. Why do they know that? Because that's the only time they ever speak to their boss, is when the boss shows up unannounced to dress them down about something. So these collaborative relationships with your leaders that would lead to them understanding your family life, knowing you as a person, understanding what makes you tick about your practice is very, very rare. If you want that to happen, you have to create it, which is what we teach. We have a whole course called Manage Your Boss. So you have to have those meetings. You have to schedule them. You have to drive the relationship so that you stand out among the folks that are employees in that institution. And I will say, choosing to be a doctor is a spiritual choice. When you get to be my age, 63, where your mortality is right in your face, you will know this more than ever. And I will say that it's always later than you think. But choosing to be a physician and to make a difference in this world is a spiritual choice. It's a heart-centered choice. It is something that's difficult to put into words. It's a feeling. The challenge is when you are working your face off in the whirlwind of your practice with the task overload of the typical medical practice, do you get enough patient encounters that warm your heart that you continue to feel that it's worth the fight?
Totally. And your boss analogy I personally, it resonates with me because going into medical field during my career, we were told no news is good news. So whenever you get called, you always go with that sinking feeling, knowing that, oh, there is some news and it's probably going to be something bad, which is why, what I've been working on in my department is we created a department web page for wellness, and that actually has a link to send gratitude e-cards to your colleagues, your trainees, other people that you work with that have positively impacted your life. And I've been trying to promote that and have something like that for every department, because I do not believe that no news is good news. If you have good news, if somebody has positively impacted your life, even in a small way, you should let that person know, because that contributes a lot to that person's day and their wellness.
Well, and I would say that comparisons of healthcare to hospitality and assembly lines are completely off the mark. And part of the reason you're having to automate the sending a gratitude card is because we're so busy at work that we don't have a chance to say those things face to face. No news is not good news. No news is just waiting for the next episode of bad news.
So lastly, before we finish, Dr. Drummond and Dr. Singhal, what do you think should be the key takeaways from today's conversation? I think we've covered a lot of good ground on what burnout looks like, what are some of the steps we can do to prevent burnout, what are the questions that we should be asking yourself that if we are experiencing these symptoms, and what can we do to help ourselves? So what do you think people should take away from today's conversation, people who themselves may be suffering from burnout or are concerned about a struggling colleague?
Dr. Singhal, go for it.
So a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is kind of tagging on to what both of you were discussing. It's really great to have the boss or seniors have a conversation even when things are going well. I found over the course of our medical careers, we'll get a lot of kudos, whether it's in the form of training evaluations, a pat on the back, a message from a patient or family or peer that we did well. I found a lot of value in creating a digital or physical folder of those accomplishments, so that when we have those down days, it's something we can reference, something that's objective outside of ourselves, that gives us meaning, reminds us of why we took on this spiritual endeavor, and serves as a bright light in the middle of a not so bright day. Another thing as we're having this conversation, if one is not sure, if it seems like, why am I here or why am I doing this, it's a good idea to talk to someone. If you're not sure what the next step is, if you're not ready to take on a wellness program, just talk to a colleague, a friend, a peer, or someone you've trained with in the past and you trust to see what their thoughts might be. It's always a good idea to take some time for self-reflection of what I signed up for 5, 10, or 20 years ago. Is that still serving me well? And is that meeting my needs, my spiritual, financial, professional, personal needs? Or is it time to pivot and think of something else? Or do I just need to find things outside of work life that are also fulfilling? As we were discussing at the beginning of this, as physicians, we're taught to sacrifice everything and wait for that perfect accomplishment to come at the end of training, which doesn't necessarily happen. So are there hobbies that we sacrificed? Are there things that give us joy outside of patient interaction that we sacrificed earlier, but we could take up now? And once we've spent some time on that, once we've energized, we've talked to our colleagues, brainstormed, looked at those accomplishment folders, does that give us a sense of renewed energy? And how can I find a way to customize wellness so I can continue serving others? Or is it time to pivot and be thinking of something else? Those would be a few of my thoughts. And also that this is an ongoing, continued conversation. There is not a one-step quick fix, but even the acknowledgement and acceptance that there is a lot of uncertainty that will continue, but there are a lot of good tools electronically, through awareness and through community and collaboration that we can bring to the table and help each other grow and support each other as a community.
I would say 2 things. Grab a piece of paper, write my ideal practice description, and let ideas flow onto that piece of paper, and be very, very patient with yourself. Some of these are echoes of your choice to become a doctor in the first place. Some of them are reactions to the things you don't like about your current practice. But always be working on clarifying your ideal job description, the job you would run towards if it was available. And then 2 quick things. As you make this list, notice where you could change just a little thing about what you're doing in your practice today that would give you more of that feeling of purpose and meaning that your ideal job would bring you. And then last but not least, the next time a patient or a patient family member says thank you to you, I want you to put down everything that's in your hands, turn and face them, and ask them, will they please say that again? And they will, because they want to see their thank you land. And when they do, take a big deep breath in and soak that good energy up like a big love sponge in all the right places in just the right amount. And whenever a patient or a family member says thank you to you in the future, go through the same activity. Can you say that again and just soak it up? You and they are going to feel better, I promise. And it's going to make a big difference in what you feel about your practice.
Thank you, Dr. Drummond and Dr. Singal. This was very helpful. This podcast is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization and is unfunded. Opinions are those of individual participants. Music is by Audrey Knapp and artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. To hear more about constructing your career in neurology, follow us on Twitter at NeuroBolts to stay up to date on new content and give us feedback on what you want to hear about and tell your friends. Thank you for joining us.